Catholic social teaching on the topic of work. Catholic tradition strongly values work and asserts rights as old as the articulated tradition known as Catholic social teaching with capital letters. Four principles, appropriately referred to as rights, are key: the dignity of work, the priority of labor over capital, the right of association, the right to a living wage. Each of these basic rights is seriously challenged in today's economic climate, including within our country. After approximately 1900 years of words and action that bespeak social justice, widespread injustices related to work sparked the beginning of a formal body of documents that apply Scripture and this tradition to the challenges of modern society. Offenses to the dignity of work at the height of the Industrial Revolution, including abridgment of the rights of workers, the exploitation of children and women in the workforce, and sweatshop conditions, led Leo XIII in 1891 to write what is considered the first of Catholic social justice encyclicals. In Rerum Novarum, of New Things, he asserted the right of the Church to speak out regarding working conditions and the economic systems of the time. This document stated that government has the duty and responsibility to protect the rights of all workers. Much of our Church's moral teaching goes back to our foundational view of humankind, created in God's own image and likeness. In Genesis, we learn of the first work given to humanity, noble work, naming the creatures, stewarding the earth's resources, working the garden. Furthermore, the Sabbath was given for rest. Consequently, the vocation to work and the conditions of work may never diminish the dignity of the human person. And the workplace must promote fairness and avoid exploitation so that human dignity is respected. In the Christian scriptures, we see the principle of the dignity of work portrayed on two levels: lived out in the life of Jesus, who earned his living as a carpenter and then as an itinerant preacher; the life and mission of Jesus, who calls us to become laborers in the vineyard and fishers of people in building up the reign of God. Because Pope John Paul II had been a laborer himself, he recognized with particular insight the importance and value of human dignity. He elevated our notion of work when he called it participation as partners with God in the ongoing creation of the world. Not just a right to a minimum wage, but a right to a living wage. Many people assume that if people are poor, they must be unemployed, underemployed, wasting their money, or making bad choices. However, 3 million low-income families with 2 full-time wage earners still live below the poverty line in our country and cannot provide their families with the basic necessities of life. In no state can a minimum wage worker afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent, working a standard 40-hour work week. Note that in Maryland as a whole, such an apartment would require 137 hours of work per week. Beginning in 1997, the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program, popularly known as welfare, was changed with the goal of putting people to work. The motivation for those changes was in part supported by the principle of the dignity of work, because work is essential to making a contribution to the world. But putting people back to work and then effectively freezing the minimum wage is a violation of workers' rights. What do we mean by saying that labor, work, takes precedence over capital? Think about it. The Catholic assertion is that the human person is the pinnacle of God's creative will and assumes the role of co-creator with God. In the marketplace, capital, meaning money available to invest, often takes precedence over the human laborer in the workplace. This point is especially true as globalization affects human enterprise. One view of labor considers it as a commodity that can be bought and sold. That gives people with capital to invest the upper hand in any negotiation. Pope Leo XIII argued differently. Human work is a necessity for human dignity. Workers need to be paid fairly. Labor has priority over capital because it is necessary for production and therefore profit. Consequently, labor ought to have a superior status over capital in negotiations. In an encyclical, therefore addressed to the whole Church, not just to workers or owners, or in a particular geographic, social, or economic area, Pope John Paul stated, "Workers' rights cannot be doomed to be the mere result of economic systems aimed at maximum profits. The thing that must shape the whole economy is respect for the workers' rights within each country and all through the world." Our own U.S. bishops reinforced these concepts in their seminal work, Economic Justice for All, when they forcibly stated, "The economy exists for the person, not the person for the economy." A basic insight of Catholic social teaching on this subject. Through work, we contribute to the needs of the greater society. As late as the 1950s, business schools taught that the purpose of business was to contribute to the common good, and profit was the reward of doing well. Today, in the specialization of our industrialized world, the dignity of human work and the contributions of individual workers are sometimes lost in seeking profit first. Even more disturbing is the notion that workers are intended to serve the economy, rather than having the economy serve humanity. The Catholic tradition encourages work that recognizes the particular gifts and talents of the worker, affording him or her greater respect and greater control of the work environment. Examples of promoted practices include personal entrepreneurship, worker-owned corporations, profit sharing. In our world today, much value is placed on wealth and too little on work. These realities highlight the relevance of our teaching and the need for action. Persistent poverty, a growing income gap, and contentious discussion of domestic and global economic issues. Take a close look at the chart. The next right we consider is the right of association. Catholic social teaching emphasizes the necessity for workers to have the opportunity to form associations, such as unions, to protect their rights in community. This right to association is a basic human right. To ensure that workers could assert their rights, Pope Leo insisted that the workers had a right to association and could form unions for the purpose of negotiating from strength, or, when necessary, going on strike. His Rerum Novarum took a clear stance on this topic, hotly debated at the time. Baltimore's Cardinal Gibbons played a key role in helping him to see the plight of workers. Pope John Paul II even went so far as to call unions an indispensable element of social life. We are reminded by Catholic social teaching that defending worker rights is a way to value solidarity and uphold the common good. You've seen that a minimum wage is insufficient to raise a family. The concept of a living wage is slowly gaining traction. It is not a brand new concept. The principle of a living wage was clearly stated by Vatican II. Remuneration for work should guarantee people the opportunity to provide a dignified livelihood for themselves and for their families on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level, taking into account the role and the productivity of each worker, the state of the business, and the common good. Catholic social teaching emphasizes the need for a living wage so that people can live full and fruitful lives without being slaves to their work. Employers should compensate people justly so that they can sustain their families. This theme echoes the Hebrew Scriptures, which contain many injunctions and warnings about the treatment and payment of laborers. One example is found in Deuteronomy. You shall not withhold the wages of the poor and needy laborers, whether other Israelites or aliens who reside in your lands in one of your towns. You shall pay them their wages daily before sunset, because they are poor, and their livelihood depends on it. In today's society, there is much disagreement about the definition of a fair wage. Should it be based on what the average worker makes? Should it depend on what the market will bear? Or should it be based on what a family needs to live a productive life and plan for retirement? The Church offers a definition of living wage that starts with what the worker requires for a life lived in the dignity befitting one created in God's own image. From the time of beginning to plan this course until the present, the question of a just wage for average workers has moved from union halls and theoretical discussions of social justice to becoming a central economic and political issue. It is not partisan politics to assert the pre-existing stance of our Church. The minimum wage does not come close to being a living wage. Examples: there is no state, county, or metropolitan area in the country where you can work 40 hours a week at the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour and afford a 2-bedroom apartment. In the United States today, there are 15 million workers whose income leaves them living above the artificially low poverty line, but still cannot make ends meet. These realities are clearly contrary to the principle of a living wage, and they challenge America's myth that anyone willing to work hard will get ahead.